This is an introduction to Wilfred Owen's Dulce et Decorum Est by Michael Elliott at the University of Calgary. The version of the poem that I'm discussing today appears in the Norton anthology titled The Making of a Sonnet, edited by Edward Hirsch and Even Boland in 2008. I'll start with the reading of the poem, but I should say that on YouTube there are vastly superior readings by acclaimed British actors. Two I can recommend in particular are by Ben Whishaw and Christopher Eccleston. We learned from the biographical note in the appendix at the back of this Norton anthology that Wilfred Owen died just 1 week before World War I ended, and that he served in the British Army. So therefore, when he refers to we, he's very much being autobiographical. A word first on the format of this poem. It is altogether 28 lines, and so those who are reading this as a sonnet will find that, of course, that it's just a double sonnet. It's two sonnets in a row. They split at, of course, between lines 14 and 15, and the rhyme scheme reflects that. But for all intents and purposes, they are one continuous poem, or this is rather one continuous poem, because the he that is referred to in line 16 is the same him that's in line 14, namely the man who has died or is dying because he has not put on his gas mask in time, and then he is carted away at the end of the poem. But before we get to him, let's look at the conditions of the entire army and what they are undergoing as they are on this march. To begin at line 1. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Before we go further, I'm just going to pause here to analyze a few of the features of these opening 4 lines, this quatrain. One of the first words that I noticed is the word cursed in line 2 as a verb for their forward movement. Only unusual because it tells you what the soldiers were saying in their mouths, what feelings they had, what sentiments they had as they were trudging forward. Trudging, that is in line 4, towards our distant rest, which of course means at least a figurative and a literal thing. It means where they are going to rest for that day in a distant, far-off place, but also where the ultimate rest, that is the ultimate death that each of them is going to confront or face eventually. Continuing on with line 2, though, I notice the compound adjective knock-kneed. And the reason that it feels significant is because you see that pattern repeated a couple of other places, particularly in line 6, blood-shod, and again in line 22, froth corrupted. The other feature that's striking in this opening quatrain is the simile that makes up the latter half of the first line. Owen manages to get 6 similes in before the 28 lines have passed, so this is just the first. He's starting right from the opening. Other similes that you see are in lines 12, line 14, 20, 23, and then the end of 23 and on to 24. But we'll come to those soon enough. Let's return to line 5. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots but limped on, bloodshod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of tired, outstripped 5-9s that dropped behind. After the complex syntax of line 4, and towards our distant rest began to trudge, which is a poetic inversion of standard syntax, you have the very standard, very straightforward syntax of the opening 3 words of line 5, men marched asleep. You then have a caesura right in the center of that line, and not one line goes by, or 3 lines go by in order that each have a caesura as well. between asleep and many, between bloodshot and all, and then again between lame and all. So you have double caesuras in line 6, and finally then in line 7 you have another caesura before you have the very dramatic caesura that is coming up in line 9. After this description of almost lifeless bodies that are moving forward drunk and deaf and stripped of their senses, you have the sudden explosion of a gas canister that is going to, like, this is mustard gas, that if it explodes and you breathe it in, you will die. You will drown in your own lungs. And so that the horror of that death is so terrifying that they have to react very quickly. And thus you have the drama that begins on line 9. Gas, gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. This someone who is dying here is never given a name. He's someone in line 11. He is him in line 14, he in line 16, him in line 18. His identity is less important. He is the unknown soldier. He is the stand-in for all soldiers who have died in this horrifying way. Owen chooses a series of ing verbs to give this man's suffering and fate a timeless quality. Look at line 19, fumbling, and again line 11, stumbling. Floundering on line 12, drowning on line 14, guttering, choking, drowning, repeated, line 16, smothering, line 17, writhing, line 19, hanging, line 20, gargling, line 22. Verb tenses are important only because what Owen is doing is describing a particular event that has a meaning or resonance beyond itself. He refers to how he saw this happening, and now in his dreams he plunges, present tense, so he's moved from past to present, and then he moves to the subjunctive tense in 17, if you could, you would, etc., later on. His message being that if you were there in a thing that was not merely localized, merely a one-time event, if you were there, you would feel as I do. So let's resume at line 17. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil's sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cut of vile incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. The Latin comes from the Roman poet Horace, meaning, it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country. And those words, which are engraved on monuments of war and are repeated to school children with high zest, the word zest nicely means the sort of positive, ardent enthusiasm for something, those words are shown, Owen shows them to be empty of meaning. Empty because of the particular horror of what this man's death felt like, of the conditions of his comrades.